Hello, folks. We're going to have a presentation today about NESARA. But before I start, I'm going to give you a tiny little caveat. I almost didn't do the show today. I'm not feeling real great. I'm kind of dizzy and my eyes are a little blurry, but I'm going to try to do this. But if I stumble along the way, that's the reason why. But anyway, excuses aside, here we go. Let's go to the first slide and we'll talk about NESARA. So basically, what we are looking at is a complete, utter, and absolute change of the economic system of the United States. That is NESARA and GESARA, which is the same thing on a global basis, taking us out of the fiat system into a gold-backed system operating on a quantum financial system that gives us privacy and blockchain security. So let's go on down and break it out. Now, there's a lot of people who say, oh, this can never happen, but we're queued up for it. It's ready to happen right now. This has been in the prep, trying to get out since the 1990s, but we were waiting for something very significant. And what was that something? We had to wait until the fiat system that's based on nothing of any value, it's just a decimal point, until that financial system reached the point of utter financial collapse. That's the moment we're in right now. That is what creates the opportunity for the transfer of wealth, for the implementation of NESARA, for what Proverbs 13:22 says, the wealth of the wicked is reserved for the righteous. We're at that moment in Exodus where basically the wealth from the Egyptians was transferred to the Israelites, and none of them left ill and none of them left poor. That is the promise that was delivered to them then, and that is the promise that is going to be delivered to us now. So let's go on down to the next slide and we'll break down. I've got a very detailed definition that I'm going to read to you, but first let's go over to those pictures. I always put them in there for a reason. We already have made provisions for what's coming. There's already been printed a gold-backed rainbow currency. That's that first picture on the left. And Donald Trump has already queued everything up for us to go into a gold-backed system. And we'll cover that in detail as we go through. But I want to read you the definition because I think it's important. This is a fairly complicated legal process as we're going to go through. And the first word I use is purported. And why did I say purported? Because, we've always got people out there that are calling us conspiracy theorists, but we're going to go through this. And when we finish, you're going to see it's not purported. It's actually happening. So it's an economic reform program promising sweeping economic reforms intended to do what? To transfer monetary control from where? From the Federal Reserve banking system to where? To the U.S. Treasury, where it was always intended to be. It is intended to replace what? The fiat dollar, the worthless dollar, with what? A sovereign commodity-backed currency, and make financial what? Restitution. Let me say that again. Financial restitution to the public. That's what's coming, folks. We are going to go from a slavery system based on hoarding and based on lack into God's economic system of plenty and abundance. And it is going to be like we're walking out of a jail cell into utopia. I mean, it's unbelievable what is coming. The world has been waiting 2,000 years for this. And God is not a liar. He promised this in Exodus and he delivered. And that's the foreshadow of what we're seeing today. Let's go to the next slide and we'll break this down a little bit deeper. So for those who've been following, you probably know what was on this slide, but for others, I probably need to break it down. Donald Trump has queued all this up from his first term when he passed Executive Order 13818. And what did it do? It basically allowed for a national emergency. And what does that mean? It means, look at those pictures. It means that we have the ability under a national emergency to confiscate assets from all of those who are involved in human rights abuses and corruption. That means that we went on something that came out a couple of years ago called a capitulation tour. So we're going to go through that in one of these slides, and you're going to see that America has all kinds of assets, all kinds of gold, and you're going to find out that we have other assets that are going to be available. So we are more than able I stress that, more than able to leave this fiat phony system backed by nothing and go into a commodity backed system. And much of what we're going to use to back it, ironically, I love it, was taken from the GAD guys who held us in slavery all this time. Let's go on to the next slide, and we're going to get down into the capitulation tour. So for those of you who didn't see this, it was called, I think, The Greatest Show on Earth. It came out a couple of years ago. I'd urge you to go and try to find it. But what it disclosed step by step by step was that England and the Vatican and the World Bank and the IMF and the G7 and NATO and the G20 and the Fed and China all have capitulated. So here's what basically happened. Trump went on a tour around the world. The first place he went was Saudi Arabia, and bam. I'm going to hold off on that. I'll wait till we get to the next slide. But basically, each of those nations capitulated. And now let's go and see how this program breaks out. Cancellation of all, keyword, illegal bank and credit card debt. Why? Because we had usury laws at one time, and they basically got a workaround around the usury laws. When they found out that there were 6 states that didn't have usury laws, they incorporated in those states and gave us these incredible debts that we have that come from credit cards that have 20, 30% interest. I mean, it's unbelievable. All unconstitutional, all illegal. Confiscation of assets from the criminal enterprises. That's what this capitulation tour was all about. Reevaluation of gold and silver. So let's stop there. This to me is mind-boggling. Gold is selling for like $3,500 an ounce right now. And what's it on our books on the Treasury at $42. Can you believe that? And so if we revalue it to something that's relatively what it's worth, it's probably going to go up way higher than $3,000, probably $5,000 or more. That brings in trillions of dollars into the Treasury. That alone would be able to wipe out most of our debt. And then they're probably going to reevaluate silver as well. But they may not even have to do that in terms of eliminating the debt, because since this is all illegal and nothing but a decimal point in the computer, we probably are going to find that we can just wipe it out. That you're going to wake up one day and you're going to find you don't have any credit card debt, you don't have a mortgage, that the world has changed and that you're no longer in a world of lack. And we're going down to this next bullet point. This is something that, unless you're people who follow, you probably don't know what this is about. It's Bretton Woods. So I need to stop for a minute, and I need to basically give you a history lesson. The time is the end of World War II. It's 1945. The world is in absolutely chaos. All of Europe has been bombed into obliteration, much of North Africa and the Middle East, and the only major nation in the world that hasn't been bombed is the United States of America. And we have all of our manufacturing intact. We have about 70% of the world's gold. And so the world gets together and says, well, we don't have any stability. We don't have any currencies that have stability. Therefore, we can't transact global trade. We've got to do something. So they called what they called Bretton Woods. And at the end of it, they said, all right, America, you can bring stability to the world. We're going to give you the right of being the world's reserve currency. So that's what we've done. But we made some promises. We promised that those nations, whenever they wanted to, could redeem their currencies in gold, which, well, when 1971, Nixon took us off the gold standard. That was a breach of that promise that we made. And we also promised we wouldn't run our presses 24/7 devaluing their currency. So basically, the world wants to get out from under the U.S. being the world's reserve currency. So we're going to have another Bretton Woods. And what's going to happen is this. The United States is not going to come out as the sole, keyword, sole reserve currency. We're going to come out, if Donald Trump's strategy is correct, which I've covered in past videos, as still the dominant reserve currency in a basket with probably Russia and Japan and China and I don't know how many companies, but we will still have enough leverage to maintain a position as the world's superpower, period. And then let's go on down. So the Bretton Woods, that's basically what's going to happen again. That's the second Bretton Woods. And the sale of, and let's go down to the last point. This is huge. And as people think about this and poo-poo it and say, this is not going to happen, there's not going to be this, everything time you turn around, there are cues coming from Trump and coming from the Q organization saying, yep, it's going to happen. So the sale of mineral rights was just announced, 250 million acres of federal land to be sold at an estimated $150 trillion. I want you to think about that. That's enough money to pay off our national debt, enough money to go in and modernize every city in this nation, enough to basically have money put into international pools to do whatever we need to do to salvage the ecological system of this planet. We will go from having a society that is based on lack and on hoarding to a society that absolutely implements all the technology that's out there that we're going to get, that we're going to talk about in a minute, and it will be a literal utopia. It will be Proverbs 12:22, the wealth of the wicked transferred to the righteous. It's amazing what's coming. Let's go to the next slide, and we'll take just a brief clips of what it looked like when they had that capitulation tour. The first place he went was Saudi Arabia, and the minute he got there, guess what happened? The crown prince was arrested, and a new crown prince was put in place, and they have a tradition. They have something called a sword dance, and only the new crown prince is to touch that sword. Look at that picture. Who's got a smile of a Cheshire grin on his face and holding that sword? Donald J. Trump. And what that means is that America and Saudi Arabia are going to war together against what? The global financial elite. And then he went to England. And you never, ever walk in front of the queen. Not only did he walk in front of her, but at one point he stopped and turned his back on her and had a conversation with one of the guards. And then this next one has had a lot of controversy around it, but basically Putin handed a soccer ball to Trump and said, the ball's in your court now. And to those who don't know history, that's not nothing. But to those who know history, here's what you need to know. Putin may be our enemy in many, many ways, but there's always vested interest that nations protect. And Russia has forever been against globalism. They came to our rescue when the first attempt was made to get the United Nations and saw to it that it wasn't passed. They came to our rescue when we fought the Civil War, when England was going to come in on the side of the South and said, you come in on the side of the South, I'm coming in on the side of the North. Why? Not because he loved us, because he was an anti-globalist. And then we go down to something that happened in China, who is our mortal enemy. And never before in the history of China had a foreign dignitary been allowed to dine in the Forbidden City. And there were many, many more. Let's see if I can just dredge up a couple out of my memories. I love this one. He was with Macron, the president of France, and he walks up to him and he goes, poke, 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 poke. And then he turns around and grabs him by the hand like he's being drugged across the stage. And then he's in Argentina. And he's standing there with the president of Argentina. And what does he do? He just stops mid-sentence, turns around, turns his back on him, and walks off stage, leaving the president standing there with his hand up in the air, shaking his head, not knowing what to do. So that's your capitulation tour at a high level. And what it means is that the money of all of the corrupt governments of the world, all control of the global financial elite, was basically confiscated. And so if you think America doesn't have gold, you're darnly mistaken. If you think BRICS is going to put together a commodity-backed, gold-backed system and America is not going to be able to follow suit, you're direly wrong. We have all the gold we need. Plus, go back to what we said before, we're selling 250 million acres of U.S. land that has been held in reserve for decades. What we have done is bought natural resources, oil and other things from other nations, so that when the supply lines got short, we would have abundance. America is perfectly positioned to be what? To be the wealthiest nation in the world, to resume its power as the predominant manufacturing center of the world and reclaim its title as the nation that God ordained to lead the world into peace and prosperity. Let's go on down to the next slide. And This is another one of these components of NESARA that's right before your faces, folks. It's right here. A state of emergency has been declared. And basically what's happening is Trump has brought U.S. National Guards and reserves into where? To Washington, D.C., and putting them in other states. And why? Because he knows that when the arrests start to come, when we find out that our election in 2020 was stolen, when we find out that we haven't had an honest election for 100 years, all the whistleblowers are coming out. Trump has said, we have it all, and it's all always been held back so that it wouldn't come out drip, drip, drip. At the end, it has to come out as a tsunami. And so when we find out that why he's actually in Venezuela and what it has to do with our elections, and when we find out that 72 nations around the world have their elections stolen, then we're going to understand that politicians around the world are going to be taken out of their positions. Washington's probably going to lose 90% of all of its politicians. Corporations are going to lose their CEOs. Banks are going to lose their CEOs because the corruption is going to be exposed, and the people who have been controlling us are going to be taken out of power. And so when we start to do those arrests, Trump is queued up. It's not going to be like what happened when we had the riots during COVID, when they just stood back and said, peaceful protests, as you can see buildings burning in the background and people rioting. No, at the first sign of a problem, he's got rapid response teams queued up, and he'll go to that location and he'll quell it. We're not going to have civil war. That's why all this drip, drip, drip has been coming out. He is positioned to make sure that we make a peaceful transition out of our slavery system into the system that we were always intended to have, a system based upon commodities, a system based upon fair, equitable taxes, a system where people who came here were able to have the American dream. I'm going to be doing a show in the next couple of weeks. I really hope you'll subscribe to this channel. This is going to be huge. Here's what I'm going to be talking about. I know I'm digressing, but I want you to hear this. Basically, I've got a real estate background. I was in real estate for 12 years, eventually had my own small real estate firm, and I want you to hear what they've done. So you'll be sure to subscribe and come back, because this is for this generation. This is for the 30-year-olds to the 50-year-olds. This is something that I think will shock you, that you need to know. They have conspired to create a situation where you literally cannot buy a house, a first-time home. You can't do it. It's just not, it's almost impossible. And what have they done? Well, let me tell you. They have created a shortage where there's literally nothing out there for you to buy. And besides that, you can't afford it because we're up to our eyeballs in debt. So let me just tell you real quickly what they've done. What they've done is they've given us extremely low interest rates for probably the last 10 years. And now those interest rates on houses are not 3% or 4%, depending on your credit rating. They're 7 or 8 or 9%. And what's that done? That has frozen the resale market. That means that all those houses that are normally coming on the market that first-time home buyers could buy aren't coming on the market. Why? Because those people can't sell, because they're going to give up a 3 or 4% mortgage and go to a 7, 8, or 9% mortgage. So the resale market is frozen. There's virtually almost no inventory coming out on the market. And then what's happening? The next phase of what they've done is 5 corporations, one of which I'm sure you've heard of, BlackRock and State Street maybe. They've got together and they control about 80% of the stock market, and now they're making a push on the real estate market. And when I was in real estate, I'll just give you one firm. We're going to get this in detail in the next coming weeks. But this generation of 30 to 50-year-olds need to know this, because there are millions of you out there that want to start a family and can't afford it, that are living at home with mom and dad in their basement, that can't have kids. And you need to know what's being done, and we need to turn it around. And that's what we're going to talk about when we get into the real estate, which is another part of the execution of NESARA. So here's what's happened on the new construction end. Those corporations, those 5 key corporations that we'll talk about, here's what they have done. They have gotten together and gone to the big home buyers. I'll just name one that I used to deal a lot of business with, Pulte. What was their primary target? They build homes for first-time home buyers, houses that were maybe 1,500 to 2,000 square feet that were reasonably priced so that you could buy a house, and that cost of that house was maybe 35% of your budget. So you could afford to buy the house and still be able to pay your car payments and be able to not be in economic distress. But what have they done? They've gone in, and those 5 corporations have made deals with the Pulte's of the world, who are the source for the first-time home buyers, and said, we're going to give you billion-dollar contracts to build houses, not for first-time home buyers, but exclusively for renters. So what was it Carl Schwab said? You will own nothing and be happy. We can't let that happen. That's part of why NESARA is happening now, because God is going to restore freedom and prosperity to the entire world, not just the United States. So please subscribe. I think this series that I'm talking about real estate is going to be the most important thing I've ever done, because it's going to tell you how the slaves of slavery are going to be taken out of the generation of people from 30 to 50. So now when people are able to buy a house, everything is pushed back. They're not buying it in their 20s. They're not buying it in their 30s. They're buying their first house in the 40s. It's unbelievable. We have to expose it so that we can get it back. And it's all part of NESARA. Let's go to the next slide. So now we're going to get down into the detail. And I got to go kind of slow on this. There's a lot of stuff here. I think I'm going to start with something that, again, Trump queued up in his first term. He made provision. Now, this would have to be approved by Congress, but for implementation of a second Declaration of Independence. And you can go out online and you can find it, but here is basically what it says. Trusting our cause is just, and having prayed for the fortitude of brave spiritual weaknesses in high places, we, who, the citizens of America, make this announcement to the shareholders of who? The U.S. corporation, the illegal corporation, including who? The City of London, the British Crown, and the Vatican. Those are our mortal enemies. And the operatives in the media, in other words, who Trump calls the lying news, in the government and in society at large. A second Declaration of Independence for the United States of America. That's what Trump has planned. And NESARA is what is going to implement it. So if you think this thing is undoable, it's been planned since 1970. We were just waiting for the collapse of the fiat system so that we can make the transition. So let's go on and run down through. I think there's 3 slides. There's a lot of bullet points to NESARA. So the first one is the Act of 1871, which is what took our republic away from us. That's where the corporation was formed, and that's what drove us into the slavery system that we're in. It's going to be eliminated, and what it's going to do is completely change our legal system. And think about how the judges have been working against Donald Trump. So all of the legal system is going to change. We're going to go back to our original Constitution and all those laws that were passed. Our Constitution was a simple document written on parchment, and it has become over a 2,700 page assortment of laws, not designed to help the American people, but to enslave us. So all the lawyers and all the judges are going to have to be retrained. I mean, it's amazing. Going on down, mortgages and credit card debt will be forgiven. Why? Because they were at the foundation illegal and unconstitutional and based on usury, which was never the intent of our Constitution. And let's go on down. In financial recovery. And what does that mean? This is the one that people really have a struggle with. But all that money that they took from us, let's go back to Egypt. When the Egyptians basically threw their hands up and said, we surrender, they gave their wealth to the Israelites and they left. They did not leave poor. All of that money, those trillions that they took, are out there in the form of expensive cars, expensive houses, expensive yachts, and hidden bank accounts offshore. That's what the capitulation tour was all about. That money is amassed and is going to be given back to us in restoration from the illegal actions that have been taken against not just the United States, but all of humanity. The Federal Reserve Central Banking System and IRS, are you ready for this? Will be replaced by a new commodity-backed monetary system under what? under what it was intended to be under the Treasury, based on what most people don't know this, but when we set up this government, our whole taxing system was based on one flat tax, a sales tax. And that's what we're going back to. So the Federal Reserve and the IRS, that is the greatest collection agency in the world that intimidates the holy heck out of all of us, is going to go away. And basically, we're going to have a flat sales tax. I mean, think about this. I live in Branson, which is a vacation community. So our taxes are probably higher than some other places. But just in sales tax alone, I pay 10% for everything I buy here. So think of the tax burden and how it's just going to be, it's going to free you up. So basically, you are going to have an opportunity to have basically enough money to buy a house, to buy a car, to have luxuries, to take a vacation. It's all changing. Everything is going to change. Let's go to the next slide and we'll break this down further. And so basically, I want you to think as we go through these, there's been preparation made for these things. They're not just hypothetical. They're already, the framework has been placed. New elections to be held. So let's think about this. What are we exposing? The whole key of what's going on right now is what Donald Trump said. I have it all. I've known it all. I've known from the beginning that the 2020 election was stolen, but the corrupt courts wouldn't let him get his day in court. But he's going to get it. And when we find out what's been done in America and in 72 other nations, probably 90% of everybody in Washington is going to be taken out of office, and we're going to have new elections, and we'll have, according to the Constitution, 120 days to orchestrate those elections and bring back in people designed to represent we the people, not the corrupt corporation. And the dollar will be replaced, that fiat worthless currency, by gold-backed rainbow currency, like we discussed a minute ago. And reinstatement, are you ready for this? Of 5,915 suppressed patents. Let's look at the pictures over to the right. So another cue. But while Trump was in his first term, he saw to it that they went to the Supreme Court and got the Chevron doctrine overturned. And what was it? It was a doctrine that said, oh, those laws regarding EPA and so forth, well, they're all written by the corporations because we politicians, we really don't know enough to write those. So basically, they had, the bad guys had control of whether a patent was issued or put on the shelf. And every time they came to it, they said, oh, that patent represents a national security issue. We can't issue that. We have to shelf it. But what it really represented was a threat to their multi-trillion-dollar control mechanism, where they controlled oil and they controlled food and they controlled water. All of that's coming out, and we're going to get free energy that's going to change the world, because I've talked about in other shows, basically, the vast majority of the cost of every item you've ever bought in your life or ever will be is energy. We're going to have free energy, and we're going to have modalities of transportation that are going to blow your mind, and you're going to have little devices in your house that give you free energy, no electric bill, and free water, no dependency on water from Flint that's full of lead, et cetera, et cetera. And now let's move on down. So after that, we're going to have endowment funds for what? Humanitarian projects. So let's break this down a little bit. We're poisoning our oceans. We're poisoning our waters. We're overfishing the oceans. There are so many things we're doing to literally kill the planet that sustains us. We are going to have trillions of dollars to put into pools of money that every nation contributes to solve all of the ecological problems that we're faced. Forget about the $93 trillion Green New Deal lie. We're going to have meaningful projects to basically clean this planet up and to regreen the deserts, just like the Bible says. Folks, let's go to the next slide and we'll wrap up the details of NESARA, and then next week we'll talk about how we implement it. So basically, this is the last of the details that are involved in NESARA. Look at this. For those of you who are older like me, you'll recognize this first bullet point. The U.S. minted precious metal coins when we stopped doing it in 1964, and we're going to go back to a gold and a silver-backed system. Daily indexing of precious metal prices. Well, basically, that means that the all of the middlemen are out, and we're going to get transparency, which is something that we haven't had in a long time. And we're going to end the state of emergency, and we're going to go back to business as usual as the United States of America under our Constitution, and restructure Social Security. And now, for those who are old enough that they're on Social Security, you'll know it was supposed to be a fund. That mean they take the money out of your check every week or every 2 weeks or every month, depending on how you're paid, and it goes into a fund where it accrues so that there is always money there for you, and you can get a nice big livable Social Security check, but they rated it constantly. So that's going to be fixed. That's going to be changed. And then what's going to happen next is, I mean, if I live in the country, so maybe you guys don't have as big a problem with this next bullet point as I do, but I'm telling you, I'm looking forward to this. And that is, we're going to basically take the Federal Postal Service and privatize it. It takes days to get a piece of mail from me to whoever I'm sending it to, and half the time it doesn't get there. And only 2 more bullet points to go. Redemption centers to come. Now, what are those all about? Remember, we're changing everything. You're not going to go to a bank for this. You're going to go to a redemption center. You're going to take your currencies in that are going to be revalued. And we've done shows recently on that. And we talked about how everything has to be queued up for currencies to revalue. And what did Trump just say just a couple of days ago? It is mandatory. This is another one of those cues that the currency of every nation in the world be at relative parity, because that's the only way you can have fair trade between all the nations of the world. So that's coming. Basically, the redemption centers to exchange at revalued currency and bonds. And the bonds will be for what again? For humanitarian projects. And the currencies will be to bring parity between all economies. So we can do what? So we can have peace and prosperity. It was Eisenhower who said, is there any man, is there any woman, is there any child that does not understand that the principal cause of war between nations is lack of parity between nations? That takes us to our final bullet point, and then we're going to leave here today and we'll be back tomorrow. End of military aggression. So if you're a nation and you want to participate in all these earth-shattering things, you have to agree to step down all of your military aggression. So another thing that's happening, ask yourself, why? Why has Trump got himself involved in all these wars, tamping them down? Because he's showing you that NESARA is just about ready to be implemented. Everything you see here is going to happen. It's all coming. And basically the wars are going to end, and they're not going to be able to inflict us with false flag events and drive us into perpetual wars designed to last for decades and leave us absolutely bankrupt. And then afterwards, we pay the bill to rebuild what they blew up. So basically, peace and prosperity is coming. And you have, I don't know how many cues in this telling you that it's all queued up, it's real, and it's coming. So with that, I'll see you tomorrow.